Syria's president blames America for the collapse of the ceasefire as some of the fiercest fighting for months erupts overnight. Dozens are feared dead after airstrikes in rebel-held districts of Aleppo, as President Assad accuses the US of deliberately targeting Syrian troops.
I believe that the United States is not genuine regarding having cessation of violence in Syria.
Also on the programme this lunchtime, it's emerged that tens of thousands of operations were cancelled by hospitals in England last year, but were not included in official figures. Survivors of a boat that capsized off the coast of Egypt say they fear hundreds of migrants may have drowned. The dangers of button batteries. Doctors warn of a sharp rise in the number of children swallowing them. And the Great British Breakup. Mary Berry quits the show out of loyalty to the BBC as Paul Hollywood decides to go to Channel 4.
Here in the south, shorter days and fewer subjects. The school's facing drastic measures because of a funding crisis. And the train crash victim who's been told she's had all the therapy possible on the NHS.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. President Assad has blamed America for the breakdown of the ceasefire in Syria, which effectively collapsed last night as fierce fighting broke out again. The city of Aleppo saw its heaviest shelling in months. At least 45 people are reported to have died. President Assad said the war was likely to drag on because of what he described as continued external support for his opponents. Meanwhile, the UN says it's sending an aid convoy into a besieged area near the Syrian capital Damascus, the first since a UN convoy was bombed outside Aleppo on Monday. Christian Fraser has this report.
4 times they've brokered a ceasefire in Syria. 4 times it's led only to a surge in fighting. And overnight it has resumed on almost every front, with reports of the most intense aerial bombardment for months. In Aleppo, the Syrians and their Russian ally dropped highly flammable phosphorus on areas where rebel fighters mix with civilians. There were huge blazes. 52 died yesterday, 45 were killed overnight. The fighting has also resumed to the east of Damascus and in the central provinces of Hama and Homs, where this bomb descended with a parachute.
Now that we are ready to be committed to any halt of operation.
The UN say no side kills more civilians in this conflict than the forces of President Assad. But he blames the Americans.
They announced publicly that they're not committed. And this is not the first attempt to have a halt of operation in Syria. The first attempt was in February, last February, and didn't work. I think because the United States, and I believe that the United States is not genuine regarding having cessation of violence in Syria.
Only Syria and Russia fly over the area where the UN aid convoy was bombed on Monday. Yet still the Syrians deny any involvement.
Those convoys were in the area of the militants, were in the area under the control of the terrorists. That's what they should accuse first, the people or the militants, the terrorists who are responsible of the security of this convoy. So we don't have any idea about what happened. The only thing that we saw was a video of burned cars, destroyed trucks, nothing else.
After the attack on the convoy in Aleppo, the UN suspended all aid deliveries. They have resumed today in some rural areas near Damascus, but countrywide there are 600,000 people trapped in besieged areas.
And what this attack really means is that there is now a tremendous cloud over the whole deconfliction and notification system that is the precondition for a lifeline to millions of people.
The answer, says the White House, is to ground all planes in key areas of Syria to protect the aid workers and engender some trust. But with such little faith at the Security Council and recriminations on all sides, the hope of salvaging this ceasefire looks to be fading quickly. Christian Fraser, BBC News.
Tens of thousands of operations were cancelled at short notice by English hospitals last year, but were not counted in official figures for last-minute delays. Hospitals have to record operations postponed on the day of surgery or admission, but a BBC investigation has found that 41,500 operations were called off within 1 to 3 days. NHS England says less than 1% of patients see their operations cancelled at what they call the last minute. Nikki Fox reports.
How are we doing at the top end?
Pressure on the NHS in England has seen an increase in the number of operations being cancelled. But whether those cancellations are officially counted depends on when they were made.
I can't walk far without pain at all, literally to the end of the room and it's there.
After a major back operation, Tony Mule is on his feet again. Officially, it was cancelled once. In reality, it was put off 3 times.
It's not like having bit of surgery on a finger or something. They were digging around in my spine, so I was apprehensive about it. So you build yourself up only to have it cancelled and you start all over again when the next letter comes.
Around half of all NHS trusts in England provided the BBC with data. Last year, they recorded around 33,000 last-minute cancellations, but more than 41,000 operations were also called off in the 3 days before patients were due into hospital and not officially counted.
So why is this happening? Some of it is forward planning for the convenience of patients. But if a hospital cancels you on the day of the operation, it has to reschedule within 4 weeks or face a fine. If it cancels the day before, that rule doesn't apply.
It is really important that the government understands the real situation and the situation that our NHS is under at the moment. We need to be honest. We need to be honest with the public. We need to be honest with patients.
NHS England told us trusts focus on monitoring last-minute cancellations because this is where the most distress is caused for patients. In Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, they have a wider definition and it's taken over several days.
This patient's got a high water-low score. Have we got pressure relieving equipment available and a special mattress?
Here at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Kings Lynn, all cancellations are down. A panel of nursing, surgical and admin staff make sure everything's in place, meeting a week in advance.
You're looking at all your theatre lists, you're looking at what comes through the front door, you're looking at your length of stay, which is really important as well. Lots of teams involved, but the planning, and you know that focus is definitely delivering a change in how we are delivering our services to our patients.
Tony Mule, meanwhile, is braced for more delays. His condition is complicated and he'll need another operation soon. Nikki Fox, BBC News.
Our health editor Hugh Pym is here, and yet another example of the sort of pressures that the NHS is under.
That's right, Sophie. This research really illustrates one area which we didn't know much about, where patients are being let down. As we've been hearing there, hospitals only have to officially record cancellations on the day. Then there's this 28-day guarantee for the surgery being rescheduled and financial penalties if the hospitals don't manage to deliver on that. But these cancellations 1, 2, 3 days before, which could cause the patient just as much inconvenience and anguish, having to rearrange things, are not officially recorded at all, and there are no penalties and no guarantees. Now, what hospital leaders have been telling us in the light of this research, they welcome the fact it's been done, they acknowledge that it should be better recorded, and they say it illustrates the pressures on the system, that you've got more and more emergency cases coming through the front door of hospitals, needing the beds, therefore they're having to reschedule operations. And if you keep beds free and they're not being used at all, then that's a problem as well. So it is more pressure on the system and it is an issue. And in fact, one hospital, in the light of this research, has changed its policy, so it says it will start officially recording these last-minute cancellations in the days before the surgery is scheduled.
Thank you. 4 men have been arrested in Egypt on suspicion of people trafficking after a boat carrying migrants capsized off the coast yesterday. Survivors have told the BBC that there were about 550 people on board and hundreds may have drowned. The boat sank in the Mediterranean not far off the coast of Alexandria. It's not clear where it was heading, but it's thought it may have been trying to reach the Italian mainland or the island of Lampedusa. The Egyptian authorities say they have recovered 42 bodies and rescued more than 160 people, mainly Egyptians, but some Eritrean and Somalis. Andy Moore reports.
Raw emotion at the harbour where many of the survivors and some of the dead were brought back. There were accounts of a boat that was kept off the coast for days as more and more people were put on board. If you wanted a life jacket, you had to pay extra. At the hospital, some of the survivors were handcuffed to their beds to stop them escaping. There was deep anger at the people traffickers who took their money and then let them die.
The boat started to tip over, then part of it broke away, and the boat was on its side. Those that knew how to swim moved away, and the women and children were left behind, and they're carrying the sins of the people that only care about money.
I don't know where my wife and son are. Only I survived. I will feel guilty for the rest of my life. I was responsible for their deaths.
There were claims that Coast Guard vessels stayed in port while people were drowning just out to sea. Some people said the police received monthly payments from the traffickers to turn a blind eye. Into the night, the survivors were still being brought ashore, mostly by local fishing boats.
I'm waiting for my cousin. We ran to tell the Coast Guard that the boat was sinking and the people were dying. But they don't care. The country we live in regard these people as dogs, not human beings.
The Egyptian government denies those claims. 4 alleged people smugglers have been arrested. The survivors who escaped injury are being kept in the basement of a police station. More than 12,000 migrants arrived in Italy this year from Egypt, compared with 7,000 last year. When some routes are closed off, the people smugglers will just seek new ones, anywhere where they can make profit from human misery. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Research suggests that thousands of women with breast cancer could be missing out on cheap drugs because of a lack of national guidance on who should fund them. A survey by the charity Breast Cancer Now suggests that 1 in 10 deaths could be avoided if more postmenopausal women had access to drugs known as bisphosphonates, which are more commonly used to treat the bone disease osteoporosis. Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
Breast cancer is the most common form of cancer amongst women in the UK, with around 50,000 diagnosed each year. One of the most likely areas of the body for breast cancer cells to travel is into our bones. Data previously published in the medical journal The Lancet showed the drugs bisphosphonates stop those secondary tumours from growing and could prevent 1,000 breast cancer deaths a year. But the drugs were only effective for women post-menopause and only available after cancer had already been detected in the bones. The charity Breast Cancer Now says the cost for prevention would only be 43p per day per patient.
This is a cheap, effective treatment to help stop women dying of breast cancer, and it's not being made available. We're really concerned about the bureaucratic barriers to getting this to patients.
Other cancer specialists also say it should be an NHS priority, which would save lives and millions of pounds. NHS England says the decisions for the funding of these drugs are taken locally, and new guidelines on the diagnosis and treatment of breast cancer are due to be introduced in 2 years' time. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News.
Mary Berry has announced that she is leaving the hit TV show The Great British Bake Off when it moves to Channel 4 next year. She says her decision is out of loyalty to the BBC, but her co-presenter Paul Hollywood has decided to stay with the show, saying he can't turn his back on it. Channel 4 has spent £75 million to broadcast the Bake Off for the next 3 years, but can it succeed now that 3 out of 4 of its presenters have walked away? Our arts correspondent David Sillito reports.
I could take more orange than that.
My problem is it's very dense. I mean, I can always wring that out like a flannel.
Paul Hollywood and Mary Berry, the judges on Britain's biggest television show.
That's a nice sponge.
Their expert eye and devilish challenges have been a key part of the Bake Off recipe. But now that it's off to Channel 4, the partnership is over. Mary Berry says my decision to stay with the BBC is out of loyalty to them, as they have nurtured me and the show. I am sad for the audience who may not be ready for change. I hope they understand my decision. I am so very sad not to be a part of it. Farewell to Soggy Bottoms. Paul Hollywood, seen yesterday walking into Channel 4, is going with the bunting. He says, it's been a huge part of my life in the past few years, and I just couldn't turn my back on all that. The bakers themselves, the bakes, the team that makes it, and of course the tent, the bunting, and who could forget the squirrels? He also gave thanks to Mel and Sue, who've also declined to move to Channel 4, and in a tweet said thank you to Mary Berry, saying, "I'll miss her," but added that he felt she had made the right decision. For keen fans, the new Bake Off will be a very different recipe.
The show just has a great feel that is unlike any other show on TV. It's going to be so hard to them to pull this off with different presenters on a different channel. And that is just going to be the real test for Channel 4, is whether they're going to really try to make this a success or whether it's all going to be flat as a pancake.
Ever since the announcement that Bake Off was going, there have been negotiations with the presenters. Paula Hollywood has been offered considerably more money to move with the show. Not millions, but certainly more than the BBC was paying. As an incentive to stay at the BBC, it's understood, according to one source, that he was offered a role on Top Gear. And Mary Berry, one former contestant, feels she's made the right decision.
She's such a fun person to have in the tent, and in a place where everyone's either kind of taking the mickey out of you or stalking around. She's literally that little island of calm and support. She's wonderful. I think she's made the right decision, though. Loyalty to the BBC, I think, is the best reason to not move on, and it's just a shame that it's happened all so suddenly.
When Channel 4 took on the Bake Off, it was said they didn't want to mess with a winning recipe. But with 3 out of 4 gone, that presenting formula will never be the same again. David Silito, BBC News.
The time is just after 1:15, our top story this lunchtime. Syria's president blames America for the collapse of the ceasefire as some of the fiercest fighting for months erupts overnight.
Still to come, we're live in Hull, the UK City of Culture 2017. The programme for next year is going to be announced in 15 minutes' time. So far, we've been told on the 1st of January, there'll be a fireworks display above the Humber Bridge, larger than the one in London on New Year's Eve.
And in South Today, shorter days and fewer subjects. The school's facing drastic measures because of a funding crisis in West Sussex. And music rings out in Winchester as the Archbishop of Canterbury heads to the cathedral for a very special celebration.
Doctors at London's Great Ormond Street Hospital are warning about the dangers of button batteries, the sort found in watches and some toys. They say they've seen a rise in the number of children suffering severe injuries after swallowing them. They can get lodged in the esophagus and burn a hole through its lining and can prove fatal. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh has this report.
Katerina is like any other inquisitive toddler. Last month, she managed to open the battery compartment on some bathroom scales and swallow the button battery inside.
And I guess you didn't think there was any danger?
Exactly. I don't see a battery. I see the scale. It's like a remote control. What you see here is a control, but inside have a battery.
This X-ray shows the battery stuck in her esophagus. Surgeons removed it within 3 hours, but it had already burned a hole right through to her windpipe. She now has to be fed through a tube and will need complex surgery to try to repair the damage. Button batteries are found in a huge range of items, from remote controls to children's toys, watches and novelty greeting cards.
And this is the battery that you can see that's been caught.
Surgeons at London's Great Ormond Street Hospital say button battery injuries are on the increase, and they're now seeing 1 case a month. Many children have lasting problems.
It is extraordinary just how much damage these innocuous-looking things can do to a child.
These batteries set up an electrical circuit, so actually they start to act and change the tissues because they're doing what they should do in your device. They're just doing it in your child.
And this demonstration using ham shows what button batteries could do to a child's throat. Look at the caustic soda which is being produced. This took 2 hours. Eventually, the meat would burn through.
Surgeons here at Great Ormond Street Hospital want to send an urgent public health message to parents and families to be aware of the dangers of button batteries and to keep them away from toddlers.
Some children need multiple operations. Other children's hospitals are also seeing many cases, and there have even been deaths where batteries have burned through major blood vessels. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
A state of emergency has been declared in the American city of Charlotte after a second night of protests over the death of a black man who was shot by police. Riot police fired tear gas to disperse angry crowds in the city centre, and the National Guard is to be deployed to help maintain order. Gary O'Donoghue reports from Charlotte.
A second night of violence in a city already crackling with tension. Police had brought in reinforcements in anticipation of protests. Just before 9 o'clock, the trouble erupted. Early reports suggested a man had been killed in what the authorities called a civilian-on-civilian shooting, but it later emerged that the individual was still alive and on life support in a local hospital. As the evening progressed, police responded to the demonstrators with tear gas and stun grenades. The anger among the marchers clear to see.
Not one of us put our hands on them. Peaceful protests. We've been doing peaceful protests the whole time.
But what precipitated this is police brutality, and you see the end result of something that happened by a police force that's supposed to be hired to protect and serve by the taxpayers. We're not here.
Some in the crowd tried to calm things down. The confrontations went on for almost 3 hours. Charlotte's mayor had already appealed for calm earlier in the day.
We understand that with these events, everyone has different viewpoints and perspectives. That makes it even more important for us to treat each other with dignity and respect, and to wait until we have all the information.
Many in the black community simply do not believe the police account of how 43-year-old Keith Lamont Scott died on Tuesday. The police say he was armed. The family says he was carrying nothing but a book.
And Gary is in Charlotte now, and you do have to wonder how the authorities are going to be able to calm this situation down.
Yes, that's right. I think they were hoping that after a lot of appeals yesterday from the mayor and from others for calm, that might transform the situation. Unfortunately, though, what started out as a pretty peaceful prayer vigil in the early evening developed into something very ugly later on. These pitched battles between police, protesters throwing fireworks, rocks and bottles, the police responding with tear gas and stun grenades. We've got 4 officers who have been hurt, not in any life-threatening sense. And I think people will be saying today, what can be done to try and prevent this happening tonight? The governor has called in the National Guard. We will see men in uniforms, military uniforms on the streets of Charlotte today, no doubt. And there will be some efforts, I think, from some of the local human rights groups to talk to the city and talk to the family as well. But at the heart of this, Sophie, is still this substantial disagreement between parts of the black community and the police over what happened on Tuesday to Keith Lamont Scott. Was he killed with a gun in his hand, or was he killed with a book in his hand? That's the centre of the disagreement at the moment.
Gary, thank you. Head teachers are warning that hundreds of council-run nursery schools in England could be forced to close as a result of government plans to provide parents with 30 hours of free childcare. Extra funding is being made available to help those struggling, but school leaders worry this will not be enough, as our education correspondent Gillian Hargreaves reports.
Shenley Fields in Birmingham is regarded as an outstanding nursery school, preparing 3- and 4-year-olds for the reception year at primary.
Is that one bigger? Yes, no, this one is bigger.
Unlike many day nurseries, council-run nursery schools are required to employ qualified teachers. As a result, they have higher running costs, but under new plans, they face an uncertain future. From 2017, all 3-year-olds in England will be entitled to 30 hours free childcare. But the NAHT says in places like Birmingham, government funding will fall from an average of £8.36 per hour of care in 2016 to £4.44 per hour by 2018. That could spell financial disaster.
I think it very likely that maintained nursery schools would be lost altogether with the reduction that is proposed. I fear for many children that will mean there is not appropriate provision out there for them. I cannot currently see an alternative for many of the children in our care. I think it would result in them not having places.
At Portman Nursery School in central London, they're shaping young lives ready for school. Parents here are full of praise for this kind of education.
I have 3 of my children attended this nursery, and they're doing really good and outstanding in their academic year. So if they didn't have that support when they were younger, which is in terms of the, like socializing, just being independent and building their confidence, that's what they need when they are that age from 1 to 5.
And nursery schools do seem to work for 3-year-olds like Mariam. 99% of them are rated as good or outstanding by government inspectors. But the teaching union, the NAHT, says if they begin to face financial difficulties and close, the implications for the poorest communities could be considerable. However, the government says it is investing £6 billion in early years education, and there will be extra funding for 2 years to help struggling nursery schools. Gillian Hargreaves, BBC News.
The Duke of Cambridge has warned that the African elephant faces extinction from the wild within a quarter of a century unless action is taken to stop poaching. He was speaking on the eve of an international conference which aims to draw global attention to the threat to many of the world's species from the illegal trade in wildlife. Our Raw correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
They've been part of the African landscape for as long as man can remember. But the future of the African elephant is in danger. They're being hunted without mercy for their tusks. Tusks made of ivory, ivory which is one of the most precious commodities in the illegal wildlife trade. Ivory which is shipped to countries like China, where it's carved into works of art. It's an illegal trade which William is determined to stop. He raised it in Washington with President Obama, and in Beijing with President Xi Jinping. And now, as Britain plans tighter laws about the sale of antique ivory, William has spoken out in London with a call to the international community to do more.
When I was born, there were 1 million elephants roaming Africa. By the time my daughter Charlotte was born last year, the numbers of savannah elephants had crashed to just 350,000. And at the current pace of illegal poaching, when Charlotte turns 25, the African elephant will be gone from the wild.
William said he was not prepared to be part of a generation which did nothing. So,
now is the chance to send an unambiguous message to the world that it is no longer acceptable to buy and sell ivory, rhino horn or other illegal wildlife products. Indeed, I would challenge anyone who knows the truth of how these wildlife products are obtained to justify desiring them. Materialistic greed cannot be allowed to win against our moral duty to protect threatened species and vulnerable communities.
in a couple of days, an international conference will consider what can be done. And all the time, in Africa, the poachers continue the brutal work which threatens to destroy the continent's remaining population of elephants. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
In 100 days' time, Hull will become the 2017 UK City of Culture, and details of the artistic programme for the first 3 months of the year-long celebration are about to be announced. Our arts correspondent Colin Patterson is in Hull, so what can we expect?
Yeah, people are heading into the Hull Truck Theatre to hear this programme, which is being announced in the next 10 minutes. I was here in 2013 when it was announced that Hull was to become City of Culture in 2017. The city was ecstatic that day. Around the rest of the UK, a lot of people went, Hull? Culture? What? So I've been out and about in the city, finding out why people here think Hull was the correct choice.
It was 3 years ago that Hull heard the good news they were to become the UK City of Culture for 2017. And it had some people wondering, what culture exactly does Hull have?
Music and arts, Roland Gift, Fine Young Cannibals, House Martins, Beautiful South, all from this area. It's a good legacy, good bit of music.
And let's not forget sport. That triumphant return to top-flight football inspires pride across the city.
The fact that we're a Premiership team, Premiership City.
That means a lot.
It means a lot to me, yeah.
And did you know Hull has its fair share of history?
This is the starting place of the Civil War. It's fascinating to be at a spot and think that this was a changing point for history.
Do you know any good facts or claims that Hull has?
Slave trade, Wilberforce. Yeah. That's a beautiful one. You know, this is where it all happened, the end of the slave trade.
But whoever I spoke to here said it was the people of Hull that made the city, never more evident than when 3,000 of them stripped naked and were painted blue for an art project to mark the City of Culture year.
I like the people of Hull, you know, everyone's really friendly, welcoming to outsiders, you know.
The people are quite unique. They're friendly. Can't beat a Hull person.
The programme will all be announced in the next couple of minutes. They're already thinking about legacy. We've learned today Hull City Council have applied to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That's for the old part of the town. That would put it on a par with the Sphinx and the Great Wall of China. That is legacy.
Colin, thank you. Time for a look at the weather now with Chris Fawkes. Hello.
Hi Sophie. Well, the sun will be coming out in Hull as we go on through the afternoon and indeed across much of the country. We've got skies that look similar to this actually. Blue sky, bit of fair weather cloud. This was sent in by one of our weather watchers, Mike Snapper, showing the scene in Worcester. On the satellite picture though, we're kind of caught between two weather systems today. We've got one to the northwest of the UK and a weather front's pushing its way eastwards today. To the east of this front, it's warm, 21 degrees at the moment across parts of East Anglia and the southeast, but just around 16 across the Midlands. It's a cold front, that strip of cloud, and although it's very weak, it is bringing that fresher air in across the country. Now, as we go through the afternoon across Scotland and most of Northern Ireland, for most of the afternoon it's dry. The showers are arriving really quite late in the day here. Across England and Wales, it's a little bit cooler and fresher compared with yesterday, but there's plenty of sunshine. It will turn a bit cloudier for East Anglia and South East England, and yes, you could get an odd shower, but I think most of these will be towards Surrey and Sussex. Elsewhere, you'd be very unlucky. Wales and South West England, some glorious sunshine to come through the rest of the day today. Now, overnight, we'll have some blustery showers moving across Northern Ireland and Scotland for a time, but then a ridge of high pressure builds in, and that means that the skies will clear, the winds will fall light, and it will turn out to be really quite a cold night. In the countryside, temperatures getting fairly close to freezing, would you believe it's, by the end of the night. So certainly a chilly start to Friday morning, but a glorious start as well. Plenty of sunshine to start the day. There will be some changes as we head into the afternoon. It will cloud over, some damp weather works into Northern Ireland, and eventually we'll start to see some heavier, persistent rain getting into western Scotland, particularly Argyll North. And once this rain's arrived, it's going to be with you for West Scotland for the next 36 hours or so. Sunshine for most of England and Wales, feeling warmer across Wales and Western England. And that's just a taster of what we've got to come, because as we go into this weekend, we dredge up some warm air from the subtropics. Now, before you get your deck chairs out, it's not going to be gloriously sunny everywhere. In fact, we'll have a band of heavy rain working into the western side of the country, and the wind's picking up gales around some of the coastal areas. But so eastern England, temperatures here could reach around 23 or 24 degrees in the sunshine. That's Saturday's forecast, but as that weather front moves its way eastwards, we'll start to get our winds coming from more of a northwesterly origin. And that means for Sunday, things will be getting cooler and fresher. Actually, for western Scotland, temperatures here could just reach around 13 degrees in Glasgow or so. Factor in the wind, it will feel a bit cooler than that, but still with some reasonable weather for many areas. Temperatures between 16 and 19 in the sunshine. Of course, it's the autumn equinox today. Easy for me to say. If you want to find out more about that, you can go onto our website, and of course those nights will be getting longer as well. Sophie.
Chris, thank you. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. Syria's president blames America for the collapse of the ceasefire as some of the fiercest fighting for months erupts again. That's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.